Have you ever wondered what it takes to transform a manufacturing floor into a world class powerhouse of productivity? Well, today's guest didn't just wonder, he's done it time and time again. From mastering lean principles at Toyota to revolutionizing fire truck manufacturing and even helping shape engineering processes at AMD, this guy has seen it all. And guess what? He's bringing some of those insights and lessons straight to you today. Hello and welcome back to the Manufacturing Culture Podcast. I'm your host, Jim Mayer, and this show is all about sharing the personal stories and leadership journeys of the incredible people that shape our industry. If you're loving the stories we share here, make sure to check out our website at themfgconnector.com. You'll find past episodes there and even more ways to connect with our growing community on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram. And hey, if you're into learning about innovative solutions and cutting edge tools for manufacturing, don't miss our other show, The Manufacturing Connector, over on YouTube. If you're looking for answers, that's a show for you. Now, back to today's guest, Bob Wilson. Bob's journey in manufacturing is my definition of inspiring. He started on the shop floor in Toyota's paint department, earned his stripes in lean leadership, and even became a certified instructor to teach Toyota's legendary Kaizen methods. But he didn't stop there. Bob took his talents to Ford, E1, and AMD, leading massive operational improvements and mentoring teams across multiple industries. Oh, and have I mentioned he invented, patented, and developed a wireless and-on system that's boosting productivity across the globe? That's some impact right there. Today, we're diving into Bob's experiences, what he's learned from Toyota's legendary approach, how he transformed departments under his leadership, and why he co-authored the eye-opening book, First Fire the Consultants. Trust me, you're not going to want to miss this one. So buckle up, folks. It's time to hear how passion for problem solving turned Bob Wilson into a powerhouse of manufacturing wisdom. Let's get started. Bob Wilson, welcome to the Manufacturing Culture Podcast. How are you doing today?
Hey, doing great. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely, man. Thanks for being here. I hope your 2025 has started off well, and you're looking forward to a great year. Bob, to start things off, I ask all of my guests this question: what does culture mean to you, and how has it shaped your career?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and having started, when I started listening to your show and stuff, it kind of made me reflect back on that, honestly, because I hadn't really put it in that context before. But when I think about, culture, it's kind of the norms. It can even get into the policies and procedures that a company has, and then how you operate within that. And so when I look back over the years at different companies I've worked with, whether directly or in a consulting mode, or even my own company. I've always tried to, how do I make that culture better? And sometimes you can directly change the culture. Other times you have to work within what's there, or a mixture of that, depending on your role. And so over the years, that's kind of what I've tried to do is, work within that culture and then see how to make it better using the tools and techniques and, things at my disposal. So that's kind of where, and it's had a major impact in kind of how I've approached a lot of different things. And that's probably what I'll kind of cover is how I worked within those different environments at different companies along the way, and how that, changed what I did over the years.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, then let's dive into that. Share your story with us, Bob. I mean, you've got quite the background. Tell us your story.
Yeah, so I guess I'll back up a little bit. Growing up, my my dad was a super bright guy. Had his master's in electrical engineering, so very handy, very hands-on. But he was a big picture guy, and he was also crazy afraid of heights. So it's kind of a weird mix. But our family owned dog kennels growing up.
Okay.
So right next to the house, we had dog kennels there. 100 dogs during the summer might be boarded.
Wow.
And so when I was real young, basically it was like, you're not getting an allowance. You want to make money. You're going next door for, I think I started about 65 cents an hour. cleaning up from the south end of a northbound dog. And so we, so I worked there, and pretty quickly I started to take over doing a lot of the business side of stuff because, like I said, my dad was very big picture, so he didn't like doing things like writing paychecks and ordering food and a lot of the bookkeeping stuff like that. So by 12 years old, I was filing the quarterly taxes and doing payroll, and so I think I had to fire somebody at one point at 12, which I look back now and I go, man, that must have been really rough to be fired by a 12-year-old. But um, but then over time, eventually he closed the kennels down. I reopened it. And so that was kind of the start. The other was just doing stuff around the house. He was very hands on, but like I said, he was wildly afraid of heights. And so, I was always happy to go climb on the roof or whatever. And so getting my hands dirty, starting to use tools and build stuff, make stuff, that should have been kind of my first inclinations towards entrepreneurship, and then also being very much into manufacturing and liking to work with my hands. So
Yeah.
so that probably started it. I'll fast forward a little bit then, and was living in Kentucky. Had started my undergraduate, got married. My wife and I lived there, and so I ended up working at getting a job working at Toyota, and so I started at TMMK there. This is early '90s, and always had a bad habit of volunteering for anything and everything. So and at the same time, it was interesting because I was going to school full time, doing my undergraduate during the day.
Okay.
I was working there at night. We were working 6, 7 days a week at this point, and so I did not have a whole lot of time. A couple of the semesters, I was lucky to get about an hour and a half of sleep a night,
Wow.
literally. And so, but Mike DePrill, who was the number two guy there, I think it was Cho was the president of the plant at the time. But Mike DePrill had spoken at something and, basically said, hey, my door's always open. And said, you ever need something, reach out. And,
Hmm.
time I'm frontline production guy working night shift at the plant, working on my undergrad degree, and we got some project for a class, and I really don't have time to do a ton of research, so I'm like, I'm going to tie any of the stuff I have to do. I'm tying it to Toyota somehow because I'd heard that what they're doing is great and it's really unique and stuff. So I thought, well, let me try to learn about this. And
Yeah.
so I call up to Mike's office, get his assistant on the phone, and said, "Hey, this is Bob Wilson. I work back in plant two paint, night shift. I'm working on my degree. I'd like to chat with Mike about some stuff." And she's like, "Yeah, okay, hang on." And so she puts me through to this guy. It was a $4 billion plant. So I mean, I'm kind of like, I was figuring maybe I'd get to chat with someone, and she puts him right on, and we chat for a minute, and so from a cultural standpoint, this was Toyota. I'm chatting with here's Bob Wilson, frontline guy, talking to the number two guy in charge of this $4 billion plant. He's in charge of operations, and so he says, "Okay, I got some." He goes, "What's your availability next week?" Not what his availability is. He goes,
Yeah.
"What's your availability? What days are you open?" I said, "Well, I'm open, these days. I get done with class at this time. I got to be, in there at by 4:30 ish." And he's like, "Okay, great. Does Tuesday work for you?" I'm like, "Yeah." So anyways, that next Tuesday, I go show up at his office, and I go in, and as soon as I go in, he walks back over to the door, looks out to his assistant, and he says, "Hey, I'm meeting with Bob Wilson." He goes, "Just hold my calls and stuff." So I'm like, this is crazy. And so, anyways, we talk, and couple things. He gave me he's like, "You seem to be interested in the Toyota story and what how we got where we're at." And so he goes over to his bookcase, he grabs a book off, and it was 50 Years in Motion, the Autobiography of E.G. Toyota. It's not a real common book. In fact, I may got a copy of it. So this is the one he actually gave me back,
Okay.
goodness, 30 years ago. If you can find it, it's a great read. It's not long, but it really goes through the history of it. And every time I read it, I see more tie-ins going, oh, that's why they started doing that. All the stuff Toyota did was to solve a problem. It
Sure.
wasn't like they sat down and said, hey, let's create this, system. They're solving problems along the way. And so you see how it kind of comes together. So he gave me that book. The other thing was we determined a project for me to do. It was
Okay.
on their logistics, in the in-plant logistics, and so he picks up the phone, calls the head of logistics for the whole plant,
Wow.
and he's like, "Hey, Dave, I'm sitting here with Bob Wilson. Like he's supposed to know who I am." And hey, he's working on this project for school, and can you guys help him out? And they're like, "Yeah, cool." So we go through what the details are, and he's like, "Hey, can you come over and meet with us next week? We'll have some stuff for you." And so I'm like, "Yeah, that's great." So the next week I go over, I walk into this, conference room. There's about 15 people sitting around the table, and I'm thinking they're finishing up a different meeting, and they're like, "Oh no, this is we're working on your project and stuff," and they've got like binders of data and stuff stacked up and charts and information. They're like, "Hey, is this gonna?" And I'm like, "This is like an undergraduate." Project for a class here. I mean, I can do a dissertation on this thing now, and but that's how they were. I mean, that's the
Wow.
kind of support you got, and it got to be where basically, I had a few semesters left, and so every semester at some point I would call up to Mike's office, and it got to be, she put me through, and he'd just start laughing, and he'd be like, "Oh, you got another project to do, I see," and so he was great, and but then another time. They had launched the Avalon, and that was when they first started doing the pearl mica paint. It was a four coat process, and
Okay.
so they were having problems with the sealer cracking, just in certain parts of it on the rear deck lid. So you open the trunk up, you got sealer cracking in there on it, and it was only happening on the pearl mica ones, and they had brought in all these vendors, and they had a team of engineers from that they were working with out at UK, and all these folks that kind of had this war room set up, and they're trying to figure out what's going on with it. And so at the same time, I happened to be going through. We were going through all the Kaizen leader training stuff. We were writing some of the materials and all these different things. And so while you're working on the line, I chatting with the guy that works across from me on the line, and he's asking about stuff, and I'm talking about all the problem solving things and stuff, and I said, well, like the sealer cracking thing, we could look at that, and he's like, yeah, okay. So we holler at our team leader. He brings us over a flip chart to put on the line. So in between cars, we're kind of making notes and jotting some stuff down. What do we
Yeah.
know? What do we not know? Starting to troubleshoot some stuff and all that. So we come up with a theory on what it could be, and so we got this theory that the deck lid's closed, the rest of the car is pretty open, but the rear trunk is pretty enclosed. So the idea
Okay.
is basically like making cookies. If you made a pan of cookies and you covered half of them with aluminum foil and left half of them exposed, and you baked it for the normal amount of time, the ones that were covered never really quite got fully baked up to full temperature. So the same
Sure.
idea with the sealer is it never quite got cured before it went through the subsequent, primer ovens, final top coat ovens, all that, and so maybe that's why it's getting cracked. And so, anyways, I chat with my group leader about this, and he's like, "Yeah, go, at lunch, run up, talk to the paint shop assistant paint shop manager." It was night, so I run up there and chat with him. And I said, "Hey, I just wanted to, we kind of thought about this. I don't know if they are looking into this." He said, "No, I know they're not." He goes, "I know that's not on their radar." And I said, "Well, you might, if you want to let them know something to look at." And he kind of gets this grin on his face. And he's like, No. He goes, "That's your and, Cleo's idea." He goes, "I want you guys to pursue it." And I said,
Interesting.
Okay." And he goes, "No, this is the process. This is the whole idea of the problem solving." I said, "All right." So, anyways, I start, working with maintenance, and they've got some, test bodies they can run through, and they got some data loggers and all this stuff. Well, anyways, we run a couple tests, and turns out, the data graphs out that, yeah, those areas are not getting up to, full temperature. And so, then we had to do more testing, see how it gets. But in the end, it solved the problem.
Sure.
And they thought it was, hilarious that they're like, well, yeah, see, this is the process for problem solving here, that we can get a room full of, engineers and, all these other folks, and they can sit up in a room and pontificate, but it's the folks that are right down on the line dealing with it, looking at it. Um, that using the process can come up with these solutions. And so that was kind of a start for my learning. And I went through all the training with Toyota, and we ended up running a bunch of, they didn't really call them Kaizen events, but we did all these projects there and stuff, and got to work in all different areas of the plant and stuff. So that was great. And I also, during that time, I served my tool and die apprenticeship, so I got to work on future model stamping vehicles.
Wow.
I really loved, working there. I think my big issue was, I had a young family. I was working nights, and I was going to end up kind of, as you advance and stuff, you'll stay on nights forever. So, so that was my main impetus for leaving Toyota. But I also had the opportunity to work with a guy, Yoshi Natsumi. He was Toyota's head of quality engineering for all of North America. He had actually gotten hired in under Taiichi Ono back in like 52 or something.
Wow.
And So, anyways, he always had this saying, he's always like, they all have, they always got to, when they're about to say something profound. And so, anyways, he's like, if you know the process, you can do anything. And he would always say that. And I was always like, well, that's great. I love that. But it it's not quite actionable. And so, anyways, I mean, I'm like, okay, so what's the process to, if you don't know the process? And
Right.
so, anyways, after Toyota, I'm working for a little while with starting to do a little bit of consulting and stuff. And I was working at this one pipe bomb factory, and so they were having problems with people wandering off the line when something would happen. And so they were like, so what do we do about this? I'm like, well, you need an and-on system. And so we talked about it. And I think I went and ran to Walmart, bought some bike flags and little air horns, and zip tied some pipe to the side of the machine so they could stick up a flag and give a chirp on the, air horn. And it's like, well, there you go. Get someone's attention, gets them over there. But then, we needed something more, formal, a little better. So, I did a hardwired and-on system, designed that, and we got that kind of, up and running. But it was just a real pain in the butt trying to do all the wiring. And as soon as you do any sort of improvement, you got to rewire it stuff. So anyways, at this point, I'm kind of thinking about this, and I'm like, and this is 2000. So, I mean, Wi-Fi is barely a thing at this point and
Yeah.
stuff. And I'm kind of mulling through this idea of an and-on system. I'm like, man, for a lean system, it's not very flexible. It's not very adaptable. Now, it works great if you're a Toyota and you've got these massive infrastructure, but for more discrete manufacturers and stuff like that, that's a tough installation. And so I was like, man, if that was wireless, that'd be great. And I was like, well, I'm not a wireless engineer, but if I knew the process, I could do anything. And so that's where I kind of came up with this model. And I've used this for that. We actually used this again years later when we started a chocolate manufacturing company.
Wow.
Um, but the general idea was kind of start breaking stuff down, to big picture, kind of create the big boxes of what needs to happen. So from a product development standpoint, from a layout, whatever it is, and then you start breaking those down into smaller pieces, and you really kind of start looking at things in terms of, um, is this a piece of critical IP that's going to be really important to my business? If it is, then I better learn that. Now, if it's something, like wireless design, there's a part of that, initially in the like the circuit design and stuff like that. That's something I can contract out. That
Sure.
is critical, but it's not going to change a whole lot and stuff. So that's something I can, contract. And then if it's a function that's just kind of a more normal business operations, managing, bookkeeping, order taking, things like that, that's something you can hire that skill set. So I kind of put it into those three buckets and start to analyze things. And then that helps to start then figure out what my approach is. And so at that point in time, I had this idea for, industrial and-ons for a wireless and-on system, but it was really an experiment. So I went to my wife and I said, look, I kind of understand how the lean stuff works at Toyota. I said, but that's when you're the 900-pound gorilla in the room. You pick up the phone and call somebody and say, hey, this is Bob Wilson from Toyota. Whoever it is on the other end of the phone is they're going to fall all over themselves to,
Yeah.
they want that deal. And so I'm like, well, how does this work for a startup, for, a nobody, for product development, for developing the patent, circuitry design, all of those things. I'm like, there's
Yeah.
a whole nother realm of this that I don't know. So I kind of wanted to put my money where my mouth was and say, let's try it. Let's experiment. And got a little bit of money and said, let's go try this out. And so about 2 years later, and I was told I was insane because they said, everyone I talked to was like, a wireless product, you're going to have to go through FCC certification probably at least 5 times, about 10 grand a pop. And,
Yeah.
you know, my pockets weren't that deep. So, just for even that one piece of it. And, but again, it was one of those, I called a testing lab and said, hey, can you give me a list of what are like the top 10 design mistakes you guys see that fail certification?
Yeah.
And they literally were like, nobody's ever asked us that ahead. And I'm like,
Why not?
what? I'm like, I mean, okay. So they gave me the list. And, as we were working on the design, because I was heavily involved in the design, because I'm
Sure.
looking at it from the physical end. How are we going to manufacture this thing? Kind of the design for manufacturability. And, so we, I said, let's make sure we got all these things, got down looking at different traces. We got different ones that need to be perpendicular. I don't want these running parallel, all this stuff. And so anyways, fast forward, a few months later, we went for FCC certification. We passed it the first time.
Wow.
Um,
Good for
and,
you.
and we did a couple other cool things with the way we designed the circuitry and how we approached it. But anyway, so we launched, industrial and-ons then. And during this time, I've got to eat. And so, I started working at Ford. So actually, Yoshi was trying to get me then to go to the Indiana plant. And because he really didn't like that I left Toyota. And so he was trying to get me to go to Indiana. They had a hiring freeze on. Ford reached out. And so with Ford, the interesting thing was there was kind of this VHS Betamax war going on at the time between Lean and Six Sigma.
Okay.
And, I sort of knew what the Six Sigma stuff was. I wasn't totally sure. But I started chatting with Ford this is the Kentucky truck plant, heavy truck plant where they build the F-250s and stuff. And so they reached out. I knew they were really getting big into it and stuff like that. And so ultimately I said, okay, I'll come, but I want to be they were just getting ready to do their first Six Sigma black belt class. And I said, I want to be in that class. And
Yeah.
so they ultimately agreed. I got into the program there. So I was working in the stamping facility heavily with tool and die, ultimately ended up being in charge of leading the tool and die department. So that was a really interesting change. So culturally, very different environment. You've got the union rules you've got to work around and things like
Sure.
that. And so as I was working there, early 2000s, and so economy wasn't great. Ford was having some problems, and so one of the things I was getting hammered with from my guys, in the tool and die department is they had basically cut the training budget. So they normally
Mm,
had a budget where, they could go, learn plunge EDM. They could learn about, different CNC programming, different tools and stuff within the shop. And that had gotten cut, and they weren't happy about it. And they had a beautiful shop, really nice setup there, and a lot of really good, skilled tool makers there. And so we're sitting there, and so finally, this is where, I'm like, how do I approach this? And then we also they were wanting to start um, an apprenticeship deal there. So they were going to have a couple of apprentices starting as well. Well, that threw a little bit of wrench into things as well with this whole training budget stuff and all that. So finally, I said, do we have a list of all the tools in the shop that we have, all the different assets we've got, and then also, I want a list of all the common skills that, as tool and die maker that you do, trim edges and, finishing stuff back and doing all the spotting stuff in, all these different things. I said, well, let's get a list of that together. And so we got a list of all those things. We got a list of all the people in there, and then I said, okay, now we're going to basically set up a skills matrix, and I want to see,
yeah.
a little pie diagram, very simple, um, and said, all right, are you no exposure to it, some exposure? Do you know it? Are you confident? Can you teach it? And so ultimately, then I said, all right, now if there's a skill you're wanting to learn or a tool you're wanting to learn on, come up with some type of a project that would benefit the shop, or that would use that thing. And so all the guys came up with lists of stuff. Well, I mean, you're working on 100,000-pound dies. You only have so many overhead cranes. You
Yeah.
constantly run into situations where it's like, okay, Joe's going to be setting this job up over here. Um, I can only have so many people helping them out, but they're waiting till they can start on their, they need the wall crane, whatever. So you got a lot of logistics going on within the shop. So a lot of times I'd look at those and it's like, okay, whatever's the hot thing, we're obviously focusing on that first. But then, all right, I got these couple guys. They're probably going to be, standing around for a while. Well, best thing I do is keep them busy, because if I don't, they're going to wander around, and talk to people, and distract
Yep.
them. But at that time, I can go and say, oh, okay, hey, Joe, you're wanting to learn the plunge EDM. Well, you know, Ed over here, he's an expert on it, and he's not doing anything either. You guys got 4 hours to go work on this and get your project moving along. So we'd
Cool.
start, doing things like that. And then also it was a good motivation because, it's a factory. People like to game stuff and whatnot. And especially within tool and die, there's the quick way if you're trying to get a line back up and running. There's the, you know, kind of middle of the road way you're going to do something if you've got, a couple thousand hits before you're going to pull the die into a PM, or you've got the perfect textbook way, which is probably going to take 3 days and, be a
Sure.
real challenge. And that's maybe the ideal way in a perfect world, but so then I found what would happen is I'd have somebody working on something, and I'd tell them, I'd say, hey, when you finish that up, whatever time you got left for today, you can go work on your project. Well, that really helped motivate folks to, hey, they love to go work on that project, do something special. So,
Yep.
so that was probably one of the biggest things culturally. Did a lot of cool projects. Ford was very data driven and stuff, but really developing kind of that training module. And then the same thing happened with with the apprentices, because we'd kind of use that same model, and they would get exposed to a lot of stuff there and trained quickly in the plant. So then when they would go to their formal classes and things like that, they'd walk in and they'd be like, oh, I already know how to do a lot of this stuff.
Yeah.
So it sped them up quicker as well, so they were able to get through a lot of their certification stuff. So it was trying to find those opportunities of how do we take that and leverage it within the bounds of what we're trying to do, and made the overall shop a lot more efficient and run a lot better. So that was great. Then
I love it.
You
Bob,
know,
real quick, how do you think your experiences with Mike early on in your career at Toyota, how do you think that shaped your approach to leadership at Ford and beyond?
yeah, I think, it really demonstrated that, you never know where people are at within their journey. And so, um, no matter what position role where somebody's at, that approach of, hey, everybody is in the trenches and seeing stuff and has, value to bring to the table, that, that just that focus of really, when you talk about all the eight wastes of, the worst being, people not being engaged, it really
Yeah,
is huge that, that you're feeling like you're part of it, that your opinion counts, and that you can, solve these problems. And so that's where, always it's really been, how do you get people more engaged? How do you, bring them into that? And so that was, so, the time with Ford was great. And then, so, and it's kind of interesting because then the whole, um, I had these parallel paths because I had industrial andons that I was launching, and and I launched, the actual product side of it while I was at Ford. Fortunately, I don't sleep a lot, so that gives me a lot of extra time. And so, so I was launching the product side of it, but then, I still got to eat while it's growing, so I do consulting work. So I left Ford. I was doing a little bit of, various consulting and stuff like that. Well, then E1 reaches out to me, and they reached out and they said, "Well, we're looking for a, kind of corporate lean guy." And I said, "Well, I do consulting. I don't. It sounds like you're looking to hire somebody." And this is what kind of happened over and over, with AMD and everything too. Was they said, "Well, yeah, but we want to talk to you." And I said, "Okay." And so at the end, I said, "Well, okay, so you want to hire me, that's fine. But I look at it as you're buying all my consulting time, just because the product side isn't going to go away. It's still going to
right.
exist. It's not going to interfere with anything I'm doing over here. We'll figure that out. We'll make it work." And I said, "If you guys are okay with that, then, let's move forward." And so in both those cases, so D1, um, the hiring VP was like, "Yeah, that's fine. Come on in." And so, so we ended up going in. And so then, D1, I was doing their, kind of the corporate lean stuff, ended up becoming plant manager. And, and again, we did a lot of really cool stuff there in, the traditional lean stuff. And that's where I started to really cut my teeth on more of the transactional items, looking at taking some of those lessons learned from developing the Andon system on more the engineering side of things, um, and really getting into that side of it. So that's where we developed some cool processes where looking at how the engineering was done, and kind of did what we called this engineering supermarket, where as they were working on stuff, how we did a bit of a Kanban system in terms of how stuff flowed through engineering on developing the fire trucks and stuff like that. So it's really kind of a
Sure.
neat, almost like a two-bin system. And then it helped them to then know when to, okay, stop, don't keep going yet, and move over here and help this group that might be a little behind. And we really started to speed a lot of stuff up.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, honestly, the coolest thing we did there, was, so when I took over as plant manager, they had a delivery center there. I mean, this is they're just north. They're in Ocala, Florida, just north of Orlando. So about 60% of the fire trucks that they sell get picked up at this delivery center, and it's a big
Sure.
deal. They come in, they do a really nice job with, they bring the truck in and have it all set up, and they've got some, breakfast and coffee and different stuff. But, these orders for a fire truck can be 500 pages long. These things
I
are
bet.
highly customized, and it can take a couple of days to go through and verify everything. And so we had kind of a real missed opportunity. So like day one of with the plant, I call over to the delivery center. I said, "Hey, do we have any of trucks for my plant?" We built all the aerials and ARF trucks, so all the cool stuff, really.
Yeah.
Um, and so they said, "Yeah, we've got one, the next day or something." And so I chatted with the guy in charge of the delivery center. I said, "All right, here's what we're going to do. These trucks have so much variability in them at any given time in the factory. Again, I'm going to have some folks that they can't work ahead. They can't, they're kind of stuck." And we had
Sure.
done some other neat stuff in the plant of moving away from product lines and more to content based lines, how much content's on the truck. That helped level load it a lot, and that was neat. But even still, I still had people available. So what I did was I set up this process where we'd get a handful of folks from the plant. So these are frontline, occasionally a manager, anyone that was
Hmm.
available. And so that morning they would, four or five of them, they'd go over to the delivery center, and I'd tell them, I'd say, "Look, just go over and hang out. When the fire chief, when their team comes in, hang back, introduce yourself, tell them, who you are, what your role on the truck was,
Hmm.
um, and then kind of hang back and see, if they got questions and they want to engage, go for it. If not, hey, get some pastries and some coffee, fruit, and enjoy."
Yeah.
I said, "But watch what they're looking at. Watch the things they're checking. How are they kicking the tires? How are they, when they're opening doors and doing things, when they're checking valves and different things, kind of watch how they're engaging with the truck. I mean, this is a real, voice of the customer, experience here."
Absolutely.
And I said, then, make note of any questions they ask you. And so there was just, so like even from day one, these folks came back and we did a little debrief. They kind of went through stuff. And I said, "Okay, great. Now go back, debrief with your lines." But then also we set up weekly meetings with one. We started to take all of that, because when you look at your standard work, for example, it's always the major point, major step, key point, and reason, the what, the
Yep.
how, and the why. Well, we would take that feedback and start baking it into the standard work. Here's the major step, but why are we doing this?
Yeah.
Well, they're saying this is important to them. Now we're getting real customer feedback into that, into the standard work, because this is why this step's important. And so that was massive. Well, at the same time, when something didn't quite fit right or whatever, we were also pulling in these weekly meetings with the design engineers and stuff like that. Because granted, the fire truck is custom, but a lot of it's based off of, we're putting these pieces together for that truck.
Sure.
So it was design, updating the designs on those pieces to fix stuff as well. So it took a little time to get going, but literally, probably, if I could go in, if I were to go back and they said, "Okay, you can only do one thing," that
Yeah.
would be it. It wouldn't want Kanban systems or, necessarily, a lot of the traditional lean stuff. It was really the engaging everyone in the plant directly to that voice of the customer and getting them involved. And the ownership, the pride, all of that stuff was massive. And then, we started having, zero defect delivery trucks. Some of the, like an ARF truck, they'd never had a zero defect delivery ARF truck before. All of a sudden, we had
Wow.
several of them. And, so it was, that's the kind of impact, the culture, and just getting the people really engaged and tied in with it, what it did. So that was huge. So
I love that. Bob, you've had a ton of successes just from hearing your story here. I'd love if you've got one or two biggest challenges or failures or mistakes that you've made throughout your career that you could share with us.
oh yeah, well that's probably even a longer discussion. um yeah, I mean, the challenges, I guess, personally, like on the, with the andon business, I love solving problems. I'm an awful salesperson. I hate to be sold to. So, I joke that I sell stuff despite myself. So it's when a customer's interested and they contact us, that's fantastic because then I'm happy to chat with them
Right.
and, do stuff. So that's probably my biggest, weakness, I guess, on that side of things. Um, when I got to AMD, that was a whole very interesting shift because I mean they do manufacturing, but it's an extremely heavy, the engineering they do there. I mean they're working on bleeding edge stuff, and so initially I had to really look at, you walk into, I did a project with this group, and it was these 15 guys, and I was, look up who I'm working with first and that, and turns out between the 15 of them, they got 23 PhDs, and
Wow.
not fluffy stuff or anything. We're
Right.
talking, quantum mechanics, wave light theory, particle theory, all this stuff like that. So I'm absolutely the dumbest guy in the room, and I'm going in to try to talk about process, with these guys, and which most of this group was like the advanced research and development group. They're working on like crazy technical stuff, like 10 years out, and so they're playing in a sandbox all day long, trying stuff out, that's not even doesn't even have a direct line to a product or anything at this point. They're just
Sure.
trying to theoretically see what happens, and I'm trying to go in and say, hey, let's put a process around this, and so the trying to make that connection, and
Yeah.
to a lot of varying degrees, I think people see this with any business. How does this apply to sales or marketing, and all these they go, yeah, I understand how it applies in a manufacturing environment. I'm moving this from here to here, and I want to, all that stuff.
Yeah.
So I guess I hadn't realized it up to that point how big of a disconnect that is for a lot of folks to make that connection. And so I kind of went back, really started doing a lot of thinking and research around that, and ultimately kind of developed this model of, because when you say process, people automatically go to this idea of manufacturing and highly repeatable Lego block pieces, and you're trying to make me a Lego block, and I'm not.
Yep.
And so I started realizing, I was, well, that's kind of what people think, but then uh, put it in this model of processes. Actually, I kind of bucketed them into this idea of a fixed, structured, and dynamic processes. So the fixed being what most people naturally think of, and the highly repeatable and all that. And so said, okay, but now if we get into product development areas, where, and I built a whole model around this stuff, and happy to share it with you. But it kind of breaks this stuff down and says, all right, so in a structured environment, yeah, I've got milestones, I've got dates and things I have to hit. If I'm working on a PCB design right now, and it's like I know I need to get this done by this point. How I'm going to do that exactly, I don't know yet. We're still researching different things, what type of transistor we're going to use, whatever. And so that kind of falls into this structured realm. So there
Sure.
may be some iterations and stuff. Well, then you get into like a sales, for example, or maybe the legal area, legal department of something. That gets into very dynamic area. So now my outcomes aren't even known; they're desired. I've
Sure.
got desired outcomes from a salesperson or whatever. So we started, so I kind of put this model together. And so when I actually went back to that team, like about a month later, to do some follow up, I kind of brought this with me, and I was like, what do you guys think about this? And, they kind of look at, I could kind of see some of them start going, oh, okay, all right, this kind of makes sense. And it wasn't necessarily that, I mean, phase gate models and stuff like that were out there, but trying to put it into those exact terms. So that was
Yeah.
one of the big ones that I was kind of like, oh, okay, that was good. That we really needed to get that connection there because we were getting a lot of pushback on it. And I think from a process standpoint, that's a hurdle, and that was very beneficial at that point.
Got it.
So yeah, so
Uh, Bob, you wrote a book that, as a consultant, I both appreciate and take exception with.
absolutely. Yeah.
It's called First Fire the Consultants. Unique title. I love it. Haven't read it, but it's on my Amazon list. I will read it here before long. What inspired you to write that book, and really, most importantly, what do you hope people take away from it?
You know, so honestly, I can't take credit for it. Roger Pinheiro, he's got to take credit for the title, and I'll blame him. Um, so so Roger was VP of engineering at AMD. He was the one that hired me in there, and um, he's written a ton of novels. He's kind of a Tom Clancy of tech thrillers. So not
Really?
business books. Yeah, not business books. Sci-fi kind of tech thrillers. Really, really well written and stuff. And so if you're into that genre, look him up. Roger Pinheiro. There's my plug for Roger.
Yeah,
Um,
I'm not
so
I'm into any genre, so I'm
yeah,
now going to look through all of them.
no, it's really, really cool stuff. Anyways, so and I'll get so he's the one that hired me into AMD, and I think because he did write books and stuff on the side, that's where he was kind of cool with the whole Andon stuff. And I told him when he hired me in that I said, look, I said, if I'm going to come work with you guys, I said, I won't do any other consulting. I said, except I said there was like three companies, Toyota, one of them, that would occasionally bring me in for
Sure.
some consulting occasionally. I said, if Toyota calls, I said, I will go. I said, it's usually not for, it's not a long period. It's usually a few days here or there or something they bring me in for. I said, but if they call, I'm going. And he was kind of like, okay. And so I'd been there about a year and a half, and one of the Toyota plants called and said, they were doing something. They said, could you come in for, a few days? I said, yeah, no problem. And so I went to Roger, and I said, hey, I'm going to Toyota, next week. And he's like, what? I want to go. I'm like, you what? He goes, yeah, I want to go. He goes, I hear all the stories and stuff. And he goes, that'd be fantastic. And I said, all right. I said, you can go, but I said, you work for me next week. And I said, you're head of engineering. And about that time, there's a lady that she was VP of marketing, and I'd done some work in her group and stuff. She happens to walk into his office right then, and she's like, hey, what are you talking about? Roger's like, I'm going to Toyota next week. And she's like, well, I want to go. And I'm like, oh my Lord. I said, we can't, I can't go rolling in with a bunch of, so I ended up, the two of them got to go, and they got to do a behind the scenes tour through the
Wow.
place, and really, sit in on some of the stuff. And it was really good, good learning and stuff. So we'd had, various experiences like this and stuff. So anyways, Roger retires, and, a little while later, he calls me up, and he's like, and we get together for lunch and stuff, and he calls me up, and he goes, hey, I got something to talk to you about. He goes, I got this book I want to write, and he goes, but a lot of the content and stuff, some of it's stories that I want to tell that are stuff that we did together, or stuff where you've got lots of stories as well. He goes, so do you want to co-author this book? And and so the obviously the first fire of the consultants, and he presented that, and I'm like, Roger, you know that I do consulting. I said, yeah, I may be shooting myself here with that. And but the premise isn't to not use consultants. Really, it's at the end of the day, don't rely on consultants to do the work for you. Learn
Yeah.
from them. I mean, they're experts in what they do. The thing is, and again, it kind of gets back to that whole idea of earlier when I was talking at the beginning with the different buckets. There's certainly some consultants you want them to come in and do something for you. If you're
Yeah.
trying to if you got an M&A situation going on, you're trying to merge. Okay, we need somebody to come in and help blend the financial systems together, do all that. But if you're hiring a lean consultant, for example, to come in to help you, you don't want them to make you lean. In that instance, you need to learn that and make it part of your culture. So
Yes.
that's where it's critical. So that's really, so it's a little bit of a, kitschy name to get people's attention. And I think, and tens of people have read the book, I'm sure. But, I mean,
You're
we launched
modest.
it in March of 2020. So that was like, maybe it's good, but, bad time for a business book. So.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, and I really want to focus in on this concept that you just brought up about learning from consultants. I've had clients, I'm sure you have as well, that and I focus on culture and leadership, and they want me to come in the door and fix them.
Yeah.
But they're not willing to do the work and actually do the fixing themselves. They expect that consultant to walk in and be the magic wand,
Yeah.
right? And I think that's why people may have that distorted view of what a consultant is, because
Yeah.
they think that this is the magic wand scenario, but really we're just an SME walking in the door to provide you the tools to do it yourself.
Yeah.
Am I off base in
Oh
that?
no, absolutely. It's funny because I was chatting with another friend of mine who uh, Toyota manager out of California, and he had left Toyota, was got into consulting, and he had called and was kind of lamenting this same thing. He's like, they want me to come in and expect that everything is going to be perfect in a month or something like that. And so I came up with this phrase. I said, well, it's, what it is. I said, it's lean liposuction. I said, they don't want to go to the gym and put in the hard work and adjust their diet and exercise and sleep and nutrition. And they don't want to do all of that stuff. They want to, go in, they want to suck all the fats and get all the waste out and be like, okay, we're done. And it's
Yep.
like, that's great if you're trying to hit a quarterly number. Yeah, you can slash and lay off and do whatever, and hit your numbers. But long term, you got to put the effort in. And so, it's that, yeah, it's like we don't do lean liposuction here. We're not doing that. You gotta, start hitting the gym and walk, change your diet and do all the stuff. And,
Can
so,
I co-opt that phrase?
yeah,
I'm
yeah,
not going to
absolutely.
use lean liposuction, but I'll say cultural or leadership liposuction, right? I
Oh
do
yeah.
love that term.
Yeah.
Um, in this storied career, Bob, and we talk about values on this show a lot with the guests that we've had. How have your values evolved throughout the course of your career, and how has that changed your approach to leadership, to your career in general?
I guess, the interesting part where, because there's there's the two sides to it. There's the and on side, which is the product side, and the the lean consulting side. And I'm actually trying to figure out how to maybe blend those a little tighter together, because there's other technical solutions that a lot of times end up falling out of even the consulting or vice versa. But
Yeah,
with that, I get to walk into a lot of, for both of those scenarios, I get to go into a lot of different companies, and I enjoy that, in because it's always kind of a challenge. It's kind of like me against, and I shouldn't say against, but it's me going into this place, and how do I show up and bring some sort of value? How am I going to see something or do something? But with that, every time I walk in over the years, more and more, and I think it started from a organizational view of part of what I have to do walking into the facility is figure out, where are they? What's going on in their environment at this moment,
sure.
from the business scenario, locally, is there something big going on? I mean, obviously, wildfires in Los Angeles, that's going to be front and foremost to anyone in that region, even,
Yep.
business wise, is that affecting supply chains, things like that. Um, but I guess, and not being, real touchy feely, is it started to trickle down and make me realize even more and more over the years of like, I gotta, you gotta be, give people some grace in terms of, you don't know where that person is at right now and what's going on in their world. So not only the
Absolutely.
organization, but the people you're dealing with as well. I've gotten feedback before that I can be a little less than um, cordial, I guess, at times. And so Roger's one of his big feedbacks sometimes. He's like, you're a little too blunt sometimes. And um,
I
so
haven't
yeah,
seen any of that, Bob. Our
it seems
interactions have
I'm a
been
work in
wonderful.
process. I'm working on it.
Yeah,
So
I love
it's,
it, man.
but, no, but I think that's, is really just dealing with people and how do we make the connection with them? And so it is more of it's that cultural connection of with people and stuff. What do you have in common? How can we, work together to get where we need to be? So,
Love it. Bob, what's your vision of what the future of lean as a principle and manufacturing as an industry? I mean, we've come a long way in a short amount of time if you look at the evolution of this industry, right?
yeah.
And the evolution of lean in particular. What's the future of both those look like?
Phew. Um, yeah, I mean, it's really interesting to see a lot of what's going on with, AI. I think a lot of the vision systems. There's a lot of interesting stuff going on with a lot of the vision systems right now. Then seeing some of the robotics stuff coming online. Is, AGVs and stuff like that, but now moving more into autonomous robots and stuff like that. I think there's some
Sure.
interesting stuff going on with all of those aspects. The big thing I look at still going into plants, and and I'm trying to work on a few things right now, is there's a there's a gap there, because I go into so many of these plants that have, they've been running since the 50s, so they've got a lot of equipment in these plants that's, there's some World War II era stuff that's still running in these plants. And thing is it's great equipment. I mean, it's still running, humming along, producing, great parts. So there's no reason
Yeah.
to necessarily get rid of it. Um, there's a couple challenges there. One is, obviously equipment costs a lot of money, but we want and need more information to see exactly what's going on. So that's where some of these like vision systems I think can help do that. The other is can we modernize some of this old equipment to be able to start getting some data and things off of it, um, without fully having to replace it.
Sure.
So I think that's one thing that we're looking at. Some of it too is, say 25 years ago when I was first going into plants with Andon stuff, and we were rolling out, where it does data collection, stuff like that. A lot of times these factories aren't in big cities, or, in a lot of cases they're out in the
Yeah.
country somewhere. And so the IT, folks 25 years ago when I started up, a lot of times it was somebody's cousin who knew how to set up a Gmail account. And so, hey, you're the IT guy now in this factory. That's improved a lot. I mean,
Sure.
there's some really bright folks now that we deal with. And but at the same time, I look at, I go to Fab Tech, and we're at Fab Tech and Automate and all these places. So I'm looking at all this stuff and I'm like, man, this is really cool stuff. The problem is in a lot of the factories, do they have the resources there to do some of these things? So I see a little bit of a
Absolutely.
gap of here's where we're at, here's what's available to be done. Um, how do we get from there to there? And so I think there's an opportunity there with, um, so I look at, I call it easy IoT. Is how do we get from point A to point B in a comfortable manner in developing some, and I'm seeing more stuff with like robots being able to be trained in much easier ways, so you don't
Yeah.
have to have an advanced degree. But so we're trying to look at stuff, saying, okay, how can we do something that maybe it feeds the data straight into, an Excel file, for example. People are very comfortable with that. and then from there we can do something more with it.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to look at those in a couple of different ways. Because also what that does is then how do we get data from, because right now what you see in a lot of cases is, you got automated cells or machine centers, you get tons of data from those. Then you've
Right.
got a half dozen operations that are manual. It kind of goes into a black hole.
Yep.
Then it goes through another process where, oh, okay, I got data again. Then it goes into a black hole.
Yep.
So, and that's honestly where when we developed with the Andon stuff was, hey, we could collect this data and it's kind of giving you status information off of these manual operations. So I'm able to get some information from these manual operations and get some cycle counting and things like that. So I think you're going to see a lot more better data streams coming across manufacturing as we incorporate some of these things like vision systems, or if you got a robot there that's doing a manual operation, well, you're going to get tons of data off of it.
Yeah.
So I think we'll see a lot of analytics going in that direction. I think some of the more routine stuff in the short term will get automated, where hopefully that helps people's backs and you know
Yep.
some of those kind of things. But then and that'll enable people to get more creative and do more important stuff in the facility. So then we can really tap into their knowledge and know-how even more. So
Bob, let me ask you a question. And this is something that I've talked about at IMTS. I did a talk on it. I've talked about it in various formats. The idea of the industry being culturally ready for automation at scale to truly adopt. I feel like we're just scratching the surface of some of the automation that exists out there as an industry. What do you think about that? Are we as an industry culturally ready for the amount of advancement that automation can provide the industry?
I think we'll see that in some areas. Obviously, you get a Tesla or some of the bigger manufacturers. I think I think you'll see it adopted there
Okay.
first. But then, some of the smaller factories that are in more rural areas may be a little longer to adopt. But now some of the robots, though, if they can really start doing the learning like they're talking, um, where it can almost be watching over your shoulder, and all of a sudden it can be like, oh, okay, I get it, okay, that's what I'm supposed to be doing. Then so as you move more into the AGI realm of general intelligence and stuff, that could be a real game changer. And that I think once you get through that training hurdle of how do we get the automation up and running, even CNC machining centers and stuff,
Yeah.
as those things I see more and more where it's like, okay, we can kind of teach it to where I don't, you don't necessarily have to have someone there that's a advanced coder or that knows all the G codes and stuff like that. um, you can bring up a chat bot and say, I need here's the print, I need to make this part. Here's the machine I'm using. It's got this chuck in there. You give it some information, and then it can create create the program basically, and then you
Yeah.
can tweak it from there. So I think that those efforts, and those seem to be moving really fast.
It does.
Right this second, I see a gap. I see, how do
Sure.
we got really cool stuff over here, and we're sitting here right now with a lot of old stuff, and there's also the investment in that equipment. So that's
Absolutely.
where I think there's a two couple fold approach of how do we keep the stuff we've got that's good and get more information data off of it, so then we can selectively replace and update and upgrade stuff over here to really leverage both of those and then still get that additional information. So you got some investment aspect to it, as well as the training, but I think it's all coming really fast. I think so.
All right. Well, Bob, I could sit here and talk to you for hours, but both of us have other things that we have to do today. So as we wrap up, Bob, what haven't I asked you today that you want to share with the listeners?
I guess popped in my head the so working with different groups over the years. One of the things I've always told the folks on my teams and stuff like that is, I said, work like you're trying to get fired.
Mm,
I said, when you go in somewhere, I said, and I don't mean, in a bad way, but if
yeah,
you're not pushing things, if you're not trying new things, if you're not exploring, asking, whatever it is, really, really push things, really work at it and think about it. At one point at E1, I don't remember what it was, but I made the argument that I said, look, I said, we've got facilities, we've got equipment, we've got people, we've got resources here. Our job is to most efficiently use all of those things to produce. We're producing fire trucks. That's what we chose to make. But I said, who's to say that if we got some extra space we freed up and we got some resources, maybe we start making, we got gas grills going out, on the side, or we start
yeah,
making grills or smokers or something. I said, don't get too fixed on where you're at. Look at, how are there other things you can do with what you've got there, and push the bounds of what you're doing. Because if you're not growing, you're not, you're dying. So
yeah.
so I always tell them, work like you're trying to get fired. So
I love it. That's that's your mic drop moment of the episode there, Bob. I appreciate it.
all
Thank
right.
you. Folks, this has been a great conversation with Bob. His story is so in depth. Uh, we've learned about some of his leadership styles, what shaped his leadership philosophies. We've learned about his time at Toyota, developing the Andon technology that he has. It's been a great conversation, and it really underscores that idea and the impact that curiosity has in continuous improvement. So, Bob, thank you so much for sharing your journey, your wisdom, your experiences with us. Um, I hope that our listeners take away something that can help them in their career pathway as well, their leadership journey as well. So, again, thank you very much for spending some time.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Folks, to you, thank you again for tuning in. If you enjoyed today's episode, please, please rate and review the show wherever you listen or watch it if you're on YouTube. Because every time you rate and review the show, it sends us up the charts. More people find the show. That way we can get more people like Bob on here to share their stories. Also, don't forget, you can go to themfgconnector.com. Check out our blog, what we've got going on, exciting updates, different events we'll be at throughout the year. And also follow us on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. Stay up to date on these episodes and what events we're at. Again, please share this show, whether it's your friends, your colleagues, your grandma. Your support helps us reach even more people in this awesome community. So until next time, keep learning, keep connecting, keep growing, and keep telling your story. Have a great day.